this is actually not a controversy about reservations, because this country is full of reservations. Almost every national law school has 20-30% reservations for in-state candidates. There are reservations for children of this service and that service, and ex-servicemen and in-servicemen. There are all kinds of reservations. There is a big clamor, which we all support, that there must be reservations for women. There already are reservations for women, and we want even more reservations for women. There are reservations for various kinds of categories. What in Indra Sawhney they call horizontal reservations, not the vertical reservations. But actually, it's not horizontal and vertical, sir. The real objection is towards having reservations for Shudras and Avarnas. That is where there is a tremendous objection, because Shudras and Avarnas, as are seen as, not competent. There is racism, there is casteism, there is deep prejudice, and there is also fear, because they're large in numbers, and they realize that it's inevitable that they will take over this country. The question is when and how to delay it as much as possible. But so ultimately, what we're fighting here is, this is not a fight about reservation. It's a fight against, as Professor Ravi Varma Kumar said, it is a fight against casteism, actually. And we are trying our best to use constitutional law to fight casteism. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's a very complex thing to do. And particularly, I think what I really appreciated about Justice Chalmeshwar's intervention was it forced many of us to focus not just on basic structure, but what is the basic structure in the context of reservations, very precisely. And I think I will try to think more about that, but answer that also. Similarly, so the last point before I get into the substance of it is, I think we have inherited a lot of vocabulary which was created by the oppressors, including forward caste, backward caste. In fact, we have a census report of 1875 and 1881 of Travancore, prepared by a Telugu Brahmin called Nagamaya, where he divides not only people, he divides gods into superior divinities and inferior divinities. And he takes all the gods that we worship and calls them inferior divinities, and takes all the Aryan gods and calls them superior divinities. So there is this background of having inherited a vocabulary. I have tried to argue that in the historic context we are talking about, what we are actually asking for, the better word than reservations, is restoration. We are asking for restoration of the opportunities that were stolen from us because of caste discrimination and colonization. We're not asking for reservation or reparation or affirmative action. We are asking for restoration. And to use a word from company law and securities law, the restoration requires disgorgement of the undue share, of what was claimed on which there is no share. And that disgorgement, it is not reverse discrimination, it is disgorgement. If somebody is sitting on, like in company law, securities law, you're sitting on illicit profits and illicit gains, you have to disgorge it. So what we are talking about here is actually restoration of what was stolen and disgorgement of what was stolen. And how do we adapt and develop our understanding of constitutional law to achieve this? That is what I see as the challenge against a very formidable environment. And the purpose of organizing these seminars is not so much that we are optimistic that this will be struck down. We don't know. It's up to the particular judges who will be there. But we do want the public to be able to react to the Supreme Court judgment in an informed manner. So they won't assume that it must be unconstitutional because the Supreme Court said so. So they would have heard us, they would have had two sides of the view, and the public would be able to take a more independent view on whether or not this violates the basic structure. And I think after this session, that would be possible. As we all said, we must also reflect on the fact that a country that sat, because of its huge antagonism, its huge racist antagonism against the Shudra and Avarna population of this country, which are including SC, ST, 80% of the population of our country. They sat contemplating reservations for OBCs for 40 years after the constitution came into effect. And then they sat on the Mandal report for a decade before they decided to implement it, and then quickly found all kinds of ways to undermine it. And then finally, and they were, in fact, as you know, the Nehru government said that economic factors and not caste should be the basis of reservations back in the days of the Kaka-Kelkar Commission. So this has been a long-standing position that somehow caste the caste identity of the Avarna and the Shudra should not be part of reservations policy. In all other fields, they will recognize that identity, social fields and in discrimination, ritual fields in temples. When we want to enter the sanctum sanctorum, we are Shudra or Avarna. But when we want to assert that same identity to restore lost opportunity, it is denied to us. And so this is a long-standing denial. And what happened in January of 2018 was a surgical strike against the Shudra Avarna community, rapid surgical strike. 7th January, the cabinet decided. 14th January, the constitution stood amended. And only 3 people in the Lok Sabha and 7 people in the Rajya Sabha voted against this, as Professor Ravi Verma Kumar very correctly pointed out. Now, the question before us today is it really a violation of the basic structure of the Constitution, and why do we say it is? In this context, what is the best argument we can construct to use constitutional law to fight casteism and caste discrimination? And I would also argue that it is a violation of the basic structure. And I would go, and I just, for the sake of the audience, that we have quite a large, we have nearly 200 people on this platform. And we have another several people on the YouTube platform as well. So, and many of them may not be lawyers. So I'll just mention that in 1973, the Keshavananda Bharati judgment said, reversing an earlier Golaknath case, that Parliament can amend the fundamental rights or amend any part of the Constitution, but impose the condition that it cannot amend the basic structure of the Constitution, which, as Justice Chalameshwar said, was left undefined and is being defined on a case-to-case basis. What is that basic structure is basically what the judges say it is. Ultimately, no one else can say what it is. But as Professor Tribe said in his Invisible Constitution, he said, that is only the court's view of the Constitution. We are all entitled to have our own view of the Constitution, whether it has any legal validity or not. And unlike Justice Chalameshwar, an academic like me doesn't retire from judging. We keep on expressing our opinions in an opinionated way. So we'll continue to take a view on whether what is the basic structure or not, although it has no legal value. Now, what is relevant to us is knowing that the Keshavananda Bharati judgment said that every amendment to the Constitution must be. Sorry, sir, you wanted to say something, sir? Sorry, sir. Sorry, sir.
Don't say it has no legal value. It may not be enforceable.
Yes.
We don't have that authority to enforce it. But don't say it has no legal value. It may have very sound jurisprudential.
That's true, sir. That is true. That is true. Very true. Very true. And so yes. So I was saying that since Keshavananda Bharati has said that every constitutional amendment must be or can be evaluated against consistency with the basic structure, since EWS amendment is a constitutional amendment and not simply a statute, our only available option for us to challenge it is to argue that it violates the basic structure of the Constitution. And there are 2 principles which I would like to share with you. One was established in a case called Raghunath Ganpat Rao in 1993, a Supreme Court judgment. which said that the principle, and quote unquote, principle of equality, the principle of equality is a part of the basic structure. Not necessarily every feature of equality, but the quintessence, the words of the court, the quintessence of equal justice is part of the basic structure of the Constitution, and no constitutional amendment can violate it. So one thing for us all to think about when we think of EWS is that does it violate the quintessence of equal justice as we understand it, as the people understand it, and the courts may have understood it, and the principle of equality. And if it does, then it violates a basic structure and it is illegal. And I will like to, in the next few minutes, to argue that it does violate the quintessence of equal justice and the principle of equality. The second is a case, Uma Devi, in 2006, in which the Supreme Court also held very specifically that the rule of equality in public employment is part of the basic structure of the Constitution. The rule of equality in public employment is part of the basic structure of the Constitution. So when we are fighting the legality of EWS, we have two instruments to work on, which are clearly accepted already. One is the principle of equality, and the second is the rule of equality in public employment, in access to it. And as you know, Article 16, the heart of Article 16 is the right to equality in matters of public employment. That's the whole framework of Article 16. And so we can say that the rule of equality in public employment is a part of the basic structure, which is why I don't understand why some of the judges are now saying that 16.4 is not even a fundamental right, when the Supreme Court has said in Uma Devi that the principle of equality in public employment is part of the basic structure, which to me makes a lot of sense, because if public employment gets vitiated and there is no equality in public employment, the entire republic will collapse. So I think if there is a basic structure, I think it should be part of it. So these are at least two elements of the basic structure which we can all think about and see whether the EWS violates it or not. And there I will just make two arguments. One is that the classification in EWS between who is eligible and who is not, the distinction it makes between who is entitled to 10% EWS reservation and who is not, actually does violate the principle of equality and the rule of equality in public employment. And secondly, I will argue that the 50% ceiling also applies to EWS. Arun Jaitley in Parliament in the rushed, when it was rushed through in one day in Lok Sabha, one day in Rajya Sabha, Arun Jaitley argued in the Rajya Sabha that the 50% only applies to 16.4 and not to 16.6. And I think that's a completely wrong argument. With due respect to him, he's no longer with us. He was my classmate in Delhi University for the LLB. So, we studied together. Obviously, we studied, we picked up different ideas from class because I don't agree with him at all. So, so this is the argument I will make. Now, in a long line of cases, the Supreme Court has also held, and this is all basic, but I'm saying it for the benefit of a lot of people who may be listening, that when a law makes a distinction or a constitutional amendment makes a distinction between people, the equality means either you don't discriminate, you treat everyone exactly alike, but the court says and the law recognizes that's not possible. You can't treat different people because you can't treat unequal people equally, so you have to make differentiation, but says that the classification that makes the differentiation or the criteria for differentiation must be reasonable, and that reasonableness is measured through two criteria, that there must be a set of intelligible, discoverable criteria to distinguish between and rational criteria to distinguish between the people who are differentiated. So in this case, between those who are getting a reservation under EWS and those who are not. And second, there must be a nexus, a connection between the basis of classification and the objective of the enactment, which is making this classification, the law that makes the classification. Sir, please go ahead, sir. Oh, sorry, sir. I'll just unmute. Sorry, sir. 1 second.
A rational nexus. That's what this
Rational nexus, sir.
Rational nexus, not
Yes.
in excess.
No, sir.
Nexus-
Rational nexus, sir. Yes, sir. I'm arguing that the differentiation must also be rational. That's my own view. And the nexus both must be
Differentiation-
rational.
Intelligible, nexus
Yes,
must be
sir.
rational. That's
Yes,
how
sir.
the Supreme Court-
Yes, sir. Sir, you're absolutely right, sir. But for me, deriving from the rule of law, all of this must have a rationality, sir, and must be reason and must have rationality.
Yeah.
But it must be intelligible differentia, and there must be a rational nexus in order for the state to be able to make the difference, to say you will get 10% reservation under 16.6, you will not. They have to satisfy these two tests. Now, I would argue that in this case, this test is not met. This test is not met. What does what does 16.6, 103 amendment do? It says that reservation is provided for any economically weaker sections, as Professor Ravi Kumar Verma also said, Ravi Verma Kumar also said, any economically weaker section of citizens other than SC, BC, and BC. So they're making a distinction between two weaker sections and not weaker sections, economically weaker sections and others who are not economically strong sections. And then they're saying amongst economically weaker sections, you must distinguish between those who are socially and economically backward classes under 15 or backward classes under 16. And those who are not SC, BC, or BC. So two levels of differentiation. So let us say that their objects of reasons and their title, all of this says that this is meant to help economically weaker sections. Okay, so they're arguing that an economically weaker section is a section, a class, a varg, or a group of people. Now, the question is, can you say two problems with it? Can you say that a section of people are that a group of people who are lacking in income and assets is a section of people? Because as Professor Ravi Verma Kumar pointed out, it is a transient criteria. It is not a stable criteria. If somebody doesn't have income, somebody writes a check and that person gets income. If somebody gives him an asset, he becomes rich. So it is like saying everyone who suffers from a curable disease is a group, because that condition will change. So it's not a stable condition on which you can construct a class of people. Now, in any case, they say section, but the section they identify is actually individuals and families, and not a group. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, please, sir. Please. One second. Yes.
While the explanation speaks about a section, there is an inherent contradiction. The criteria is individual.
Yes.
You can't see if somebody has to identify an economically weaker section, the criteria must be something applicable across the board of that section. Then in the same explanation to 16.6, it says economically weaker section shall be such as may be notified by state from time to time on the basis of family income. Family income can't be of any section. It can be only of an individual.
Yes.
Individual. There's an contradiction in the explanation.
Yes. Exactly, sir. Exactly. So therefore, what we are saying, what I'm also arguing is that the
purportedly what you are saying. That's all. I'm only supporting what you are saying.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. Well said, sir. So what we are saying, what you and I are both saying, is that the purported purpose of this group, and I'll come back to this, is something to be remembered, I'll come back to this, is to assess economically weaker section. But the criteria identifies individuals and families. And the criteria are also transient and are individual. Now, there is a principle of bill of attainder in common law that you cannot make law for individuals. Law has to apply to a group or except in very, very exceptional cases, which don't apply here. You can't make law for individuals. And here they're trying to really make law for families and individuals and not a real section of people based on transient criteria. I would argue, sir, that what they are doing here is they're saying economically weaker sections, but their criteria are financial and not economic. There's a very big difference between economic and financial. They're only focusing on financial criteria. Economic, by definition, includes social factors, institutional factors, macroeconomic factors. That's the difference between economic and financial. So when you say economically weaker section, your criteria have to be economical. And let me bring up a point I was going to make earlier. If you look at Kaka-Kelkar report, and also you look at Mandal Commission report, and the elaborate criteria they have developed, sir, to identify backward classes. They're looking at occupation, they're looking at literacy, they're looking at housing, they're looking at income, they're looking at the condition of other members of the group, not just the family or the individual, but the group as a whole of which you are a part, and they're getting data about all that. Those are economic criteria, sir. So I would argue that if you look at economically weaker section, the really economically weaker sections are actually BCs and SCBCs. They are the economically weaker section. The people they've identified are people with financial criteria who are not a class, and there is no economic criteria there. So actually what they're unintentionally doing through this language they're using is, they're saying that this reservation is really for BCs and SCBCs because they are the only ones who are really economically weaker. And they can't take financially poor upper caste and say you're economically weaker section. You're not a section and you're not economically weaker because the criteria is only purely financial. And so therefore, if we look at this framework of differentiating between those who get EWS and those who do not get EWS, it simply doesn't meet the constitutional law criteria for reasonable classification. For there to be a set of intelligible criteria. The intelligible criteria are mismatched with the applied criteria, and the intelligible criteria are not applicable to the target group at all. Because the target group is actually decided by a base of caste, and I'll come to that. So, so what we really have to now, how do you know what is the mechanism to find out if you are one of those who are eligible to receive reservations under this 16.6 or 15.6? It says that you should not be a member of SCBC and BC. How do you prove that, sir? How do you prove that? Can I make a declaration that I'm not a member of SCBC or BC? Can I get a certificate? I can get a non-creamy layer certificate. Is there such a thing? Who can identify on what basis, sir, that you're not a BC or an SCBC? There's only one criteria on the basis of which the state can say you're not an SCBC or a BC. And that criterion is you actually belong to a forward caste. There is no other basis on which anyone can certify that you're not an SCBC or BC. Self-declaration, of course. And I know some people who have talked to me, sir, in some of the groups I work with. They're saying, I fall within this below 8 lakhs, whatever criteria. My son, will not get admission under BC because the cutoff is very high. This is a much lower cutoff. And so I want to apply for this EWS. How can I do it? Can I convert into the Brahmin community or some other community? Can I say I'm an atheist? I denounce my BC caste. I'm a human being. Anyway, most BCs don't believe in all this, so it's easy. You can't. So the only mechanism they've provided is that you have to, by which you can prove that you are a member of SCB, not a member. So this is the first law in the country that we are going back towards pre-constitutional Chaturvarnya days, where a criterion is that you shall not be a low caste to get a governmental benefit. We have now written into the constitution a provision that says to get a benefit from the state, reservations, you shall not be a low caste. And today, how can you prove that? Only by if you are an upper caste. And therefore, I entirely agree with Professor Ravi Verma Kumar that this is the first purely casteist provision of the Constitution. because 16 and 15 always looked at multi-dimensional approaches to poverty, where discrimination on the basis of social identity as a woman, as a caste, was one of the factors to be taken into account. And Mandal Commission was advised by no less than M.N. Srinivas, who was not famous for not being for being neutral on caste and so on. So he had strong views on caste. But even he, the best people in the country advised Mandal Commission. They came up with a multi-dimensional approach to identify backwardness, not caste. But here we are forced to say that only caste identity decides whether you will get benefit under this EWS reservation or not. Nothing else, because you have to prove that you are an upper caste. Then you will get a reservation. Otherwise, you cannot, because there's no other way you can determine. So it is a purely casteist. It's a purely casteist provision in the Constitution. And in any case, sir, in a case 1973, Parimo, P-A-R-I-M-M-O versus Jammu and Kashmir, 1973, Supreme Court, and UP versus Pradeep Tandon, 1974 Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has ruled that discrimination cannot legally be made based on income and assets alone because of its transient nature, because there are financial factors. That the discrimination cannot legally be made based on income and assets alone in such situations. So we have Indira Sawhney itself, sir, that said in para 121 of Justice Jeevan Reddy's judgment, that whether under 16.4, leave 16.4 alone, even under 16.1, there cannot be reservation under economic criteria alone, not financial criteria, even economic criteria alone. And so we have very good law that says this entire framework of the 103rd Amendment is completely flawed and in complete violation of the basic structure principles of principle of equality and the principle of equality in public employment, which are both accepted principles under the basic structure document. So I have come to the conclusion, sir, that the real full form of EWS is not economically weaker section. It is exclusively and wholly for Savarna. EWS. Exclusively and wholly for Savarna. And you have to prove you're a Savarna and then you will get it. So now I come to the second one, sir. It is a second part of this, which is that it is also entirely illegal and a violation of the basic structure to wholesale exclude from reservation articles, under Articles 15.6 and 16.6 reservation, all SEBCs and backward classes, discriminating between economically weaker section, financially weaker section. I won't call them economically weaker section, financially weaker section on the basis of caste is a clear violation of the basic structure. There's no nexus, no rationality. So either you say, I give everyone who is financially weaker reservation, which is not justifiable for reasons I've just said, but even if you say so, but you cannot throw out SEBCs and backward classes. So that's another reason why this is a gross violation of the basic structure principle without any doubt. Actually, if there is any group of people, as I said earlier, that are actually economically backward, see, economically weaker and backward is the same thing, sir. They're synonymous. It's synonymous. They are the SEBCs and BCs, and they cannot be and should not be rationally excluded from this framework. Last point, sir, is whether 50% ceiling can be exceeded, because that's an implementation issue. Let's assume the whole thing is valid, but if there is 50%, can you go over 50%? And the argument that is being made by Jaitley in the Rajya Sabha and is now being made is that Indira Sawhney itself had said that the 50% rule only applies to 16.4, and of course then there was no 16.6. It does not apply to 16.6. Now here I want to say two things, sir. As you know well, both of you, all of you know well, the main principle asserted in the Constituent Assembly, including explicitly by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, as a matter of strategic compromise in order to get these reservations provisions through into the Constitution, and in Indira Sawhney and in other judgments, is that 50% must be kept open for open competition. Otherwise, Ambedkar said, if you have the majority reserved, then 16(1) becomes which gives you the right to equality of opportunity in matters of public employment. 16(1) becomes meaningless. So he says, look, even he said, and many other judgments have said, that at least 50% must be kept for open competition, which is why they put a 50% cap on, starting from Balaji, a 50% cap on reservations under 16(4), which were the only reservations under 16. Under 16(4), which should not exceed 50%. Now, that principle, that in order to protect equality of opportunity in public employment, you must keep 50% open as open competition, applies regardless of where the diminution of 50% comes from. That principle is a principle, whether it comes from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it doesn't matter. You have to keep that principle. Therefore, it will apply to 16(6), that you can't diminish it. Now, here's the other thing, sir. They are arguing that Indira Sawhney applies. Indira Sawhney's narrow holding of 50% applies only for 16(4), which is backward classes reservation. Let me accept that argument, sir. But what that really means, and Indira Sawhney actually did say that 50% of rule applies only to reservations in favor of backward classes under 16(4). They actually said that, Justice Jeevan Reddy's judgment. But that must be read in the following way, sir. Because the significant change that Indira Sawhney made, Justice Jeevan Reddy made, was for the first time he said, yes, there is 50%, but you can exceed 50% in extraordinary situations, in extraordinary circumstances. That is only applicable to 16(4). That ability to expand, go beyond 50% can only be done from 16(4), not from 16(6). Therefore, if you take this whole thing together, what we're saying is nothing can go above 50% because you have to keep the sacred principle that 50% must be kept for open competition. That's a sacred principle. It doesn't matter where it comes from, you can't diminish that. But there is one exception, which a 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court has given us, which is for 16(4), for backward classes reservation, you can go over 50% and reduce the open market to less than 50% for extraordinary circumstances. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That is a qualified statement. That is a qualified statement of Jeevan Reddy. He said that exceeding 50% in exceptional cases, like far-flung areas.
Extraordinary circumstances.
So, no, and also
yes, sir.
Some far-flung areas, there is the expression used. Obviously, correct, statement is something like 6 schedule areas, some northeastern part of the country where the whole territory is something like that. Not that whatever criteria they choose. In fact, the other day, when I haven't got the full judgment, that Maratha reservation, I don't know, it's very relevant in the context of this question that judgment will have to be studied. I haven't yet got it.
Yes. I have read that, sir. Yes, sir. No, I agree with you, sir. In the Maratha judgment also, they have now said that, and they've all agreed, sir, that the Justice Jeevan Reddy's language cannot be read as saying that's only illustrative, that it must be extraordinary circumstances, but far-flung is only illustrative, and far-flung could also be interpreted as remote, sir, extremely marginalized people, whether they are in a slum in Bombay or far-flung. They're far away from the center and they're in the periphery of society. And I'm happy with that, sir. I have no problem. I think that's a good way to interpret it because it will benefit the people on the periphery. But I'm making this argument, sir, that if we accept the fact that the 50% rule in Indira Sawhney is for 16(4), the cap is for 16(4), then that cap can only be exceeded for 16(4) and nothing else. For far-flung areas, for peripheral cases, in the extraordinary situations, but you can then diminish the sacred cow of open market only for 16(4). But you can't do it for 16(6). You can't do it for 16.6 unless you have either another amendment to the Constitution or another bench of the Supreme Court, large bench of the Supreme Court modifying.
See, that 50%, that 50% for this also, 50% open competition is available even to a candidate who otherwise belong to 16.4 category. If he comes by his own merit, he can also get in there. Actually, the judgment of the Supreme Court. You can't count him again as a reserved quota. If he can, so therefore,
what
that
I'm
is
saying,
possible.
Yes, sir.
That possibility is ruled out in EWS.
Sir, except that what we've said is that, look, it comes to horizontal and vertical, sir. If he comes within the 16.4 vertical, he comes as a backward class, 16.4 backward class candidate. Then not even 15 SEBC, but 16.4 backward class, that includes SC/ST as well. Then you can say, okay, there is a clear legal dictum. Now, it can be expanded further, but there's a clear legal dictum that if you are within 16.4 backward class, in extraordinary circumstances, far-flung areas, you can go beyond 50%, right? And but there is no other scope to do that. So therefore, what I'm saying, I'm concluding in these two ways, sir. One is that 50% applies because of the open market requirement for 50%. You cannot exceed 50% under 16.6. And if a particular situation arises where in the vertical vertical reservation of 16.4, you want to expand within the criteria allowed by Jeevan Reddy in 16.4, then that can be considered. You can go, but nothing else. So and therefore it becomes impractical to EWS becomes unimplementable because you cannot actually go beyond 50% for 16.6. That's where I disagree with Jaitley's point of view, sir. So this is these are the two large points I want to make, sir. That in terms of differentiation and classification, the classification is completely violative of the basic structure. And second is that under the basic structure doctrine, in any case, you cannot violate the equality of employment, which has been recognized as part of the basic structure, because that requires keeping 50% open market free. So you cannot implement it without violating the basic structure. So for these two reasons, I would argue, sir, that we are, that the reservations exclusively and wholly for Savarnas, EWS, does violate the basic structure of the constitutions. So let me stop here, and may I request Justice Ishwaraya, sir, to kindly enlighten us, sir. Oh, sir, I have to. I think I may have to. 1 second, sir. I have to unmute. Unmute. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I've been. One second, sir. We have with us Justice Virendra Singh and Justice Harip Parandaman. I would request them after Professor Biju has spoken also, if they would like to offer any advice and guidance, it would be very nice. So I've sent a request to unmute to Justice Ishwaraya. Sir, you may have to unmute on your machines. Not able to. Yes.
Yes, now it.
Yes,
before
sir.
me,
Yes,
before
yes.
me, Professor Ravi Verma wants to say something, sir. He has raised his
Yes,
hand,
sir.
sir.
Yes, sir. Sorry, I'm sorry, I did not see that. Forgive me, Professor Ravi
Yes.
Verma. Please go ahead, sir. 1 second. I'll just. Yes. Yes, sir. Professor Ravi
Yeah,
Varma.
I fully share the views, Professor Mohan Gopal. I fully agree with you. Only by way of a addition, I would like to say this. While social backwardness is something which a student suffers during his educational period and therefore qualifies for reservation in services, economic backwardness or financial backwardness is not suffered during his childhood. He would still be eligible for reservation, even though he has not undergone any hardship, either during his school days or during his childhood or during his higher studies. So this is one point I wanted to make. Secondly, the second part of Article 14, equal protection of laws, which speaks of substantial equality, is to bring about equality in the society by giving reservation in favor of those who are already overrepresented, who enjoyed a monopoly. It would be increasing the inequality rather than reducing equality. So Article 14, the second part of Article 14 is also valid, is my response. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Sir.
Thank you very
Sir.
much, sir. If I may just respond in 10 seconds, sir, with your permission. Professor Ravi Varma Kumar, I entirely agree with you. Remember, we are talking of the group, not of individuals, sir. So a
Yes.
group that is socially and educationally backward as a class is also the consequence of that backwardness is economic marginalization, sir. Economic marginalization. And but what 15 wants is social and educational backwardness, and 16 talks about backwardness. But what I was submitting is the Sandel Commission took a very complex and very sophisticated, multi-dimensional approach towards the backwardness and marginalization of groups, and only considered communities which were marginalized, which may also be referred to as caste, but they were not being selected because of their caste. Caste was one of the reasons they were marginalized. Because of caste, because of the social identity of caste, they were discriminated against, they were ill-treated, they were attacked, they were not given opportunities, so that is taken into account. So here what we are saying, as Justice Chalmeshwar also said, the classification system is based on individual and family, not of the class. Whereas, so if to accept section as a class, then frankly only SCBCs and BCs are there, sir. There is nobody else in this country who is economically weaker class other than SCBCs and BCs as a class. And so I don't see any sense in having the separate group, because these two groups have to merge and be treated as really as integral. So that's my point, sir. I agree with you that we are focusing on social and educational backwardness.